Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me. And so it's my honor to be back here again, this time on India 36. So I'll just start and let me just share my screen. So with this, I would like to start. Basically, this is an accounting standard, and we'll take about 90 minutes or so on this standard, hopefully. Hopefully, we should be through with it, not unlike the previous standard on Ind AS 103, where we couldn't complete it in our scheduled time. So let's see if we can. So this hopefully should be done in 90 minutes. And so before we start, I would like to make a poll. Uh, okay. Shilpa, I've lost the polls on my screen. Okay, no, I got them. I got them. So just first poll, which is basically I'm simply asking whether you've done impairment testing before, and if you could just answer it very quickly, and we can then sort of see what is the ratio of people who've done it, who've not done it, and accordingly we can then proceed further. So it would be great if everybody answers.
Request all the participants we got only 13 votes out of 23 members.
So we'll wait for a few more.
Sir, actually we are not getting any voice. We can't hear you, sir.
16 now. Yeah.
Now, yes.
Okay, so a majority of the people, I suppose you can see the results now on your screens. A majority of the people haven't carried out impairment testing before. So I will sort of keep that in mind while taking you through the session. So 3 have done it, 13 say they haven't done it. So I'll keep that in mind. So primarily Ind AS 36 is not a valuation standard; it is an accounting standard. So it talks about what we need to do from an accounting perspective. However, these are so there is Ind AS 36, which is for Indian accounting standards, and we have AS 28, which is for your old accounting standards. 99% of the standards are common. They're mostly common. There are only a few, very few differences between the two. So the principles of impairment testing, how they are carried out, it's exactly the same in the two standards. And impairment testing is to be conducted only if one or more external or impairment triggers are present, except in case of goodwill and indefinite lived assets, where such.
We can't hear you, Mr. Joy, now.
Again, voice is gone.
Yeah. So we can't hear you now.
Whether it is international valuation standards or IC.
Sir, we lost you for half a minute. Can you repeat, please?
Okay. So basically, so what I was saying was that Ind AS 36 and AS 28. AS 28 is the standard under the old accounting standards for impairment. 99% of the standards basically they are the same. And the process of impairment is absolutely the same between the two standards. There is no difference. It's only a minor difference here and there, and they are mandatory for the companies to adopt when doing impairment testing. And the standards also say that impairment testing has to be done only when some impairment indicator is present. There could be external indicators or internal indicators, which we will talk about later on, except in case of goodwill and indefinite life assets. So for goodwill and indefinite life assets, we have to do impairment testing on an annual basis. Then while valuers, if the companies give the assignment to valuers to carry out impairment testing, then the valuers can apply other valuation standards like IVS or ICIVS or some other standard as may be applicable to carry out impairment testing to the extent applicable along with Ind AS 36. So primarily the guidance given in Ind AS 36 or 28 has.
Again, lost the voice.
We can't hear you, Mr. Joy. No, Mr. Joy, we can't hear you at all.
Okay, you can't hear me. Okay.
Now we can. In between, it's going, off.
Oh.
Now we can hear you.
So
I think there may be a problem with your Bluetooth, with the speaker, with the mic. That may be the issue.
Okay, so let me just, so if you'll just wait, I'll just shift to the laptop mic then. Yeah, that might be better. Just give me a second.
So you can see my screen now?
Yes, and your voice is also much better.
Okay, thank goodness. Yeah. So, so what I was saying was that so valuers can apply other valuation standards to carry out impairment testing, but they have to follow the guidance for impairment testing as given in these standards. And also there is a detailed disclosure requirements in these standards. So valuers would be expected to also provide those disclosures as a part of the report. So Ind AS 36 and Ind AS 28, they both use a concept called recoverable amount. They don't use the word fair value anywhere. They use the term recoverable amount. So we have to compare recoverable amount with the amount that is appearing in the books of accounts. And recoverable amount has been determined to be the higher of fair value less cost of disposal. So fair value is the same as we measure fair value for any other asset, which is what you must have heard yesterday on Ind AS 113 fair value measurement. So the same fair value measurement standard has to be applied to determine fair value. And the only thing is then we have to reduce cost of disposal from that fair value to arrive at this number. And second is we have to do a DCF calculation, which is called value in use. So we have these two numbers and we have to consider higher of these two to see if there is any impairment. We will talk in detail about these things, but I'm just giving you a summary, an overview right now. And while the big difference is that while the fair value is based on the perspective of market participants, value in use is entity specific. So we have to consider entity's point of view while making the projections and doing discounted cash flow. And synergies, so if there are different units in a company and there are synergies between different units, so those synergies can be considered while calculating value in use. And here we don't use the word units or divisions. Here we use the word cash generating units. And what exactly is cash generating unit, we will sort of look at that a little later on in the presentation. So basically what we have in the standard is objective, definition, scope, identifying impairment, indicators of impairment, measuring recoverable amount, and recognition and measurement of impairment loss. Just a second. Yeah. And also then we have identifying CGU. So the asset talks, so the standard talks about carrying out impairment testing of a particular asset and also of a CGU. So it covers two different aspects. And when we say asset, from a certain perspective, an asset could be just as a piece of machinery or a piece of land or a building or whatever. But on the other hand, an asset could also be a business. Then we're talking about recoverable and carrying amount of CGU, goodwill, corporate assets. So there are certain corporate assets like the corporate headquarters a company may have, or they may have certain common assets which are used by various divisions or CGUs. So they are termed as corporate assets. Then there is also a concept of reversing impairment loss. So if impairment loss has been booked in 1 year, it can be reversed in subsequent years. And disclosure. So we'll sort of understand about all these going forward. As far as the international standard is concerned, basically our standard is the same as international standard. The only thing is that international standard, there is a publication called illustrative examples. So that illustrative examples have not been included in any of the, and many of the international standards have those illustrative examples, and those illustrative examples have not been included in any of the NDSs in India. So some places the standards refer to those examples. So those references have been deleted. Though these illustrated examples are available on Institute's website. So if somebody wants to see, they can go to the Institute website. So Institute website has a lot of IFRS material. Institute of Chartered Accountants, they have a lot of IFRS material on their website. So versus AS28, I said that the 99% of the standards are same, but there are 1 or 2 differences. A key difference is that Ind AS also applies to investments in subsidiaries, associates, and joint ventures. So the holding company will also require to carry out impairment testing of investments in subsidiaries, associates, and joint ventures using this standard. They are not covered under Ind AS 109, financial instruments. And all other investments are covered under Ind AS 109 except these 3. Subsidiaries, associates, and joint ventures are covered under Ind AS 36. And goodwill in a business combination is not amortized but tested for impairment. In AS 14, which is the standard for accounting for amalgamations, that says that any goodwill arising should be amortized over a period of 5 years. Or more if the company can justify that. But in Ind AS, there is no concept of amortization of goodwill. There is only a concept of testing impairment. And goodwill acquired in a business combination, intangibles having indefinite useful life. So this is another concept that is there in Ind AS, is that they say that certain intangibles can have indefinite useful life. And such intangibles are not amortized or depreciated. They just management has to assess each year whether they have definite life or whether they continue to have indefinite life. And if they have continued to have indefinite life, then they are not depreciated, but they are tested for impairment. An example could be brand. A company could have brand, and we have brands which are continuing for such a long period, and they may continue. If we talk about in India, we have Surf. Or we talk about globally, Coca-Cola, Pepsi. There are many brands like that which have been continuing for a long period of time, and they may continue for a long period of time. So it is very difficult to say what their life would be. So such intangible assets are treated as intangible assets having indefinite useful life. Or they could be intangible assets which are not in use. So they are either not being used by the company, or they may be under the process of development. So if they're not being used, they again have to be tested. The standard says that they again have to be tested for impairment. So goodwill, intangible assets having indefinite use, or intangible assets not being used. So these 3 types of assets have to be tested annually for impairment, irrespective of whether there are any indicators of impairment or not. So this is something which, as far as AS28 is concerned, that talks about that intangible assets not in use or having amortization period exceeding 10 years only need to be tested for impairment. Under AS, we do not have a concept of indefinite useful life. So all intangible assets have to have a definite life under AS26, that is. So allocation of goodwill could be different. In Ind AS, the concept is that the goodwill can also be allocated to existing CGUs. CGUs are cash generating units. So not only the one that has been acquired, But if there are synergies, if there are similar businesses, then the goodwill could be allocated to other CGUs also, which are expected to benefit from the synergies of the business combination. So that is another difference. So goodwill can get spread over more than one CGU, and then all those CGUs will need to be tested for impairment every year. And this standard AS28 uses the standard bottoms up or top down for impairment of goodwill, but such language is not used in Ind AS 36, and but the concepts are similar. And in Ind AS 36, another important thing is, as far as goodwill is concerned, impairment of goodwill can never be reversed. It is just not allowed. But AS28 says that in exceptional cases, it can be reversed. So that is another difference. So these are the main differences. But when it comes to the methodology of testing, how to calculate fair value less cost of disposal, how to calculate value in use, all those are exactly the same. There's word to word, they are same. So the objective of the standard is to prescribe procedures that an entity applies to ensure that the assets are not carried at higher than the recoverable amount. So we have to carry them at lower of cost and recoverable amount, if I put it the other way. Like we have for inventories, we have lower of cost and utilizable value. For all fixed assets and intangible assets, including goodwill, we can say we have a concept of lower of cost and recoverable amount. So it applies to all, basically it applies to all fixed assets, all intangible assets, and subsidiaries, associates, and joint ventures, which I already mentioned. These are not covered under the impairment of these standards, is not covered under Ind AS 109. It is covered under Ind AS 36. So these standards are not covered, certain items are not covered in this standard because those respective standards provide enough guidance. For example, if you talk about inventories, we are anyway doing them at cost or net realizable value, whichever is lower. So that is already taken. So any impairment is taken care of in the net realizable value part of it. Contract assets and assets arising from cost to obtain or fulfill a contract. Again, Ind AS 115 provides guidance on their impairment. Deferred tax assets, again, the standard Ind AS 12 talks about whether we should or we should not recognize deferred tax assets and what criteria we have to consider. Employee benefit assets, Ind AS 19 provides that guidance. Biological assets are covered under Ind AS 41. Deferred acquisition costs and intangible assets under insurance contracts. So that is mostly not relevant for most of us. That is covered under Ind AS 104. Non-current assets or disposal groups held for sale, they are covered under Ind AS 105. And again, that standard talks about a similar principle in Ind AS 36 that they have to be carried at lower of cost and fair value. So there we don't have a concept of recoverable amount. There we simply have a concept of fair value less cost of disposal. So there they have to be carried at lower of cost and fair value less cost of disposal. And financial assets under 109, as I already mentioned, the standard at 109 covers impairment of all financial assets except investment in group companies, which are covered in this standard. So as I mentioned earlier, recoverable amount of an asset or a cash generating unit is the higher of fair value less cost of disposal. So I will be using this term FVLCD for that throughout, and value in use, which is VIU. So we have to compute whenever we are doing impairment testing, we have to see which one of the two is higher and compare that with the carrying amount. The carrying amount is the value which is appearing in the books of an asset. And as I mentioned earlier, value in use is basically a discounted cash flow approach. So we are doing present value of future cash flows expected to be derived from an asset or a CGU. That is the definition given. And CGU is basically the smallest level of business which can have its own independent cash flows. So the standard uses the term smallest identifiable group of assets that generate cash flows. So it has to be some kind of a business which is generating cash flows. It could be a department, it could be a line of service, it could be a factory, it could be a geographical area, production line, whatever. It could be a branch for a bank or for some other entities. It could be a branch also. So it depends. So whatever can generate independent cash flows, that becomes a CGU. And fair value, the definition is same, which is there in Ind AS 113, which is price received to sell an asset or paid to transfer a liability in an orderly transaction between market participants at the measurement date. So this is important from the perspective of FVLCD. So fair value less cost of disposal. So here the fair value is as per Ind AS 113. And then we reduce cost of disposal. Then I also talked about corporate assets. These are the assets other than goodwill that contribute to the future cash flows of both the CGU under review and other CGUs. So basically these are common assets. I gave an example of corporate headquarters. There could be other common assets a company might have. So if there are common assets which are being used by multiple businesses, then or multiple CGUs, then they are treated as corporate assets and they have a slightly different treatment for testing impairment. An impairment loss is basically the amount by which the carrying value of an asset or CGU exceeds its recoverable amount. So if the carrying amount is higher than recoverable amount, the differential will be a loss which we have to then charge to profit or loss account or adjust against revaluation reserve if there is any. So when we are identifying impairment, as I said that like in inventories, we have a concept of lower of cost and net realizable value. For fixed assets, intangible assets, etc., we have a concept of lower of the carrying value and recoverable amount. And then recoverable amount is the higher of FVLCD and VIU. So this is just a pictorial depiction of what we have discussed earlier, just to sort of make it clear. So there is a lot of work involved in impairment, particularly calculating the recoverable amount. So as I have already mentioned that we will carry out impairment of assets only if there are indicators. If there are no indicators, we will not do it. Exceptions are goodwill, intangible assets with indefinite lives, or intangible assets not being used. So these three items, goodwill, intangible assets with indefinite life, and intangible assets not being used, they will be tested every year irrespective of indicators. So any company which has goodwill has to carry out impairment testing. So basically in Ind AS, goodwill only arises on business combinations. There is no other goodwill. So that means a company must have done some business combination in the past. So any company which has goodwill appearing in its consolidated financial statements or standalone financial statements, they will have to do impairment testing every year. And the important thing also is that the standard does not say that it has to be done only at the year end. It says it can be done at any point in time during the year, but every year it should be done at the same time. So if say somebody does that at 31st of December, the year end is 31st March, but they do impairment testing at 31st December. So every year they will have to do impairment testing at 31st December itself, unless there is a trigger to do a impairment testing earlier, which is also possible. So just to give an example, there are a lot of multinational companies where the parent companies have their year ending as at 31st December. In India, the companies, because they're following Companies Act, they do 31st March. So if they are preparing accounts for the parent company for consolidation at 31st December, they might be doing impairment testing at 31st December. So that impairment testing can be used for Ind AS accounts also, no problem. It is not necessary to do impairment testing for these three items: intangible assets with indefinite useful life, not available for use, and goodwill. For these three items, it can be done at any point in time during the year, but same time every year. That is to be kept in mind. So for these items, again, goodwill and tangible assets with indefinite useful life are not available for use. Amortization is not allowed. And there is also an EAC opinion. EAC, for those who are few who are not chartered accountants, would know that it is expert advisory committee of the Institute of Chartered Accountants, and people can raise queries and they give their opinions. So that is an opinion. Well, it is there in the standard also, but they have also given it as an opinion. So just to see how we can identify impairment, I have some basic examples. So first example is that we take an asset, and we are talking about one asset only. Say it could be a machine. So it has a carrying value of 10,000 rupees. Fair value less cost to sell or fair value less cost of disposal is 12,000 rupees. Value in rupees is only 3,000. Value in use is only 3,000. But the standard says that the recoverable amount is the higher of the two. Higher of fair value less cost to dispose and value in use. So here the higher of the two is 12,000 rupees. And then we have to consider what is the lower of the two. For books, the carrying amount is 10,000, fair value less cost to 12 is 10,000, so carrying amount is lower. So there will be no impairment. So we will continue to carry the asset at its carrying amount of 10,000 rupees. Similarly, another example. So we have an CGU, and these numbers are in millions. So the carrying amount is 10,000 million. Fair value less cost to sell is 8,000 million, and value in use is 9,000 million. So here again we have to take the higher of the two. The higher of the two is 9,000. Carrying amount is 10,000. So since recoverable amount is 9,000, which is lower than 10,000, we will have an impairment. So we have an impairment of 1,000 million over here in this example. So this is just to explain how impairment is calculated. So now coming to indicators of impairment, the standard, both Ind AS 36 and AS 28, they have exactly the same indicators in that. First is decline in assets market value more than what is expected due to normal usage or passage of time. So normal usage or passage of time is your depreciation or amortization. So if there is a decline in assets market value more than that, then we have to do impairment testing. Significant adverse changes in technological, market, economic, legal environment. There could be changes in tax laws, emergence of better products, prolonged recession. For example, we now have this COVID impact, which may last longer for certain businesses. For certain businesses like airlines, travel and tourism, hotels, restaurants, cinemas, it might have a much longer impact. So there could be, so there is a possibility of impairment over there. So that becomes an indicator of impairment. And technology, we are seeing there are so many new startups coming, so many new technological products coming, which may make certain old products obsolete. So for those old products, they will have to then do testing of impairment testing to see whether they can still survive or not. And then again, where the market interest rates or market return on investment has increased, which is likely to affect the discount rates. So if the interest rates go up, then obviously your discount rates will go up and your present values will go down. So that could have an so if the market rates have gone up, then that is an indicator that there could be a impairment. And last is that carrying amount of net assets is more than market capitalization. So this is basically for listed companies. So where the listed company's market capitalization is lower than the carrying value, then there would be, that is again an indicator of impairment. So classic example is say if a company has a net asset value of per share of 15 rupees and the share is trading in the market at 9 rupees. So that is an indicator of impairment, and so impairment testing needs to be done, because market must be seeing something now that it is not going to make profits. So that is an idea. So where the market value of the share is lower than the net asset value, that is again an indicator of impairment that we need to look at. And particularly at March 31, this happened in many cases because the share market fell significantly over February and March. So this could have happened in many cases. So companies need to look at their projections. Companies need to do impairment testing in all those cases. Then there are certain internal indicators as well. So these were the external indicators that we talked about. Internal indicators are obsolescence or physical damage of an asset for whatever reason, asset becoming idle. So we have lots of factories, lot of hotels, lots of other things which have become idle nowadays because of COVID-19 impact. So that is one example, but it could be other examples also. There is glut in the market, so companies are not able to sell their products, or there could be any reason. So if the plant becomes idle, then that is one indicator that there could be impairment. Plans for a significant reorganization or discontinuation or sale of an asset. So companies planning to do some restructuring, and because of that restructuring, maybe some product line might get closed, some business may get closed, so some product lines may get shifted from one factory to another. Things may happen. So as a result, that could result in impairment. And as we have been hearing nowadays recently for COVID-19 impact is that a lot of companies are saying that they will give up office space. Now because a lot of people are working from home and they intend to make sure that people continue to work from home, so they will give up some office space. So when they give up office space, whatever leasehold improvements are there in those offices, furniture, etc., that will be impaired because it will no longer be useful. So things like that we have to see. And where the life of an asset is reassessed from indefinite to finite. So for whatever reason, company say had a very famous brand of a product, but a competitor's product has come in, and as a result, this brand's sales have been going down. So maybe the company will then have to say, okay, the brand is no longer, brand does not have indefinite life anymore. It will have a finite life because it might get beaten by the competition. So in that case, again, we look at whether there is impairment. And evidence that the asset's economic performance is worse than expected. So if, as we all know, companies make budgets, companies make forecasts. So if your actual performance, actual profitability is lower than that, lower than those budgets, then that is again a indicator of impairment. So they have again said within internal sources, they have given some more examples that cash flows for acquiring the asset or subsequent cash needs for operating and maintaining the asset are significantly higher than those budgeted. So company had say if we were to take this setting up of a power plant, so the company had a projection, they had the plans, they had the budgets, everything. But because of some reason, the plant sort of stopped construction for 2 years or 1 year, and the costs escalated. So after the escalation of the costs, whether that plant would still make profits becomes a question. So things like that need to be tested for impairment. Or second example is actual net cash flows, operating profit or loss flowing from the asset are significantly worse than those budgeted. So which I've already mentioned earlier. So if there is a loss or the profits are significantly lower than those that were budgeted, or cash flows are significantly lower, then again that is an indicator of impairment. So next point is also basically the same. They're just coming from the standard. I suppose they've written the same thing in different languages. And last one, operating losses or net cash outflows of the asset when current periods are aggregated with budgeted amounts for the future. So while so there may be a loss in the current period but not in future, or loss profit in the current period but not in future, but a loss in future. So if we aggregate the two, there is still a loss. Then again, that is an indicator of impairment. So these are various indicators of impairment that have been given. So companies have to look at these indicators every year and then see whether they need to do impairment testing or not. And of course, auditors have to sort of also look at it from their perspective and agree with the management or disagree with the management whether there needs to be any impairment testing or not. So for subsidiaries, associates and joint ventures, there are couple of additional indicators which have been given in the standard. And these are that the carrying amount of the investment in separate financial statements exceed the carrying amount in the consolidated financial statements of the investees' net assets, including associated goodwill. So your value of the investment is higher than the value of net assets in the consolidated financial statements. And secondly, the dividend exceeds the total comprehensive income of the subsidiary, associate or joint venture in the period in which the dividend is declared. So which basically means that the dividend is being declared from retained earnings. So that if the dividend is being declared from retained earnings, then obviously then it is implied that the profitability has reduced or gone down. So that is again an indicator of impairment. So these are two additional indicators that have been given for testing subsidiaries, associates, and joint ventures investments. So we also have an example for this. So let us look at this. If you can just read this, please. So 30 lakhs for 60%. And if we can see here, the equity is 40 lakhs. So 40 lakhs, so 60% of 40 lakhs becomes 24 lakhs. So, and the company has paid 30 lakhs. So goodwill is 6 lakhs. Now, if we go 1 year later, the equity has reduced from 40 lakhs to 20 lakhs. So as far as the company is concerned, the holding company has investment at 30 lakhs in its books, but it will be carrying in the consolidated financial statements, it will be carrying net assets as 20 lakhs plus goodwill of 6 lakhs, so 26 lakhs. So investment value in standalone accounts is 30 lakhs. In consolidated financial statements, it has net asset value of 20 plus goodwill of 6. So 26 lakhs. So the numbers in the consolidated financial statements are lower than in what is there in the standalone financial statements. So this could be an indicator of impairment. So at lower of cost and recoverable value. And then we have also discussed that the recoverable value is higher of FVLCD and VIU. So let us see then how do we now calculate those two amounts, FVLCD and VIU. So the standard says that we have to do impairment testing asset by asset unless it does not generate independent cash flows. So if we talk about, say, your land or building or plant and machinery, on a standalone basis, they may not be generating cash flows. So we have to then club them together to make a CGU. And as I mentioned, CGU should be one which has independent cash flows. So either at an asset level or at a CGU level, we have to do impairment testing. And then we don't have to necessarily test both FVLCD and VIU. We do any one of them. If that number is higher than the carrying amount, then we stop. Then we simply stop over there. We say, for example, if we calculate FVLCD and we find that FVLCD is higher than carrying amount, we don't have to calculate VIU because this number is already higher. We are anyway supposed to consider higher of the two, not FVLCD and VIU. And if we have calculated one number and that itself is higher than the carrying value, we don't need to do any further impairment testing. We just stop there. So we can either do FVLCD or we can do VIU. Either of the two, that is the company's choice. Well, there is nothing in the standard which says that you have to do this first and then the other one second. Nothing like that. Company can choose to do either FVLCD or VIU. Company's choice. Absolutely company's choice. Or the valuer's choice, depending on what the engagement is. So you do one, and if that number is higher than carrying amount, we stop, because then there is no impairment. But if that number is lower than the carrying amount, then we have to also do the second method. If we have done FVLCD first, then we will also do VIU, because we have to consider higher of the two. So we will do the second method only when the first method is giving a value which is lower than the carrying amount. So please keep that in mind. So we do one method. If the value is higher than the carrying value, we stop. We don't do anything more. Matter ends. So we say FVLCD or VIU, whichever is higher than the carrying amount. These are the numbers, and we stop. But if that is lower than the carrying amount, then we have a problem. Then we have to do the other method also. So I've talked about that we have to do testing every year for goodwill, intangible assets with indefinite useful life, and intangible assets not in use. So the standard has given a little bit of a breather for intangible assets with indefinite useful life. They've given some relaxation there, and the relaxation is effectively that you could continue to use the calculation that was done in the previous year. So it is only a relaxation for 1 year. So you still have, basically it means you still have to do every alternate year. So it says you can use previous year's calculation if the following conditions are satisfied. If these conditions are satisfied, then you don't have to do calculation this year. You can use previous year's calculation only. But this is only for indefinite life useful assets. It is not for goodwill. It is not for assets not being used. If for goodwill or assets not being used, you have to do impairment testing every year. There is no exemption. You have to do it every year. Only for indefinite useful life, they have given this relaxation of an alternate year. So it says that you don't have to do it if you did it in the preceding year, that is the last year you did it, and that amount may be used if the following conditions are satisfied. First, the intangible asset does not generate cash flows from continuing use that are largely independent of those from other assets or group of assets. So that means on its own, that intangible asset is not generating any cash flow. It is only generating cash flows as a part of a CGU, and is therefore tested for impairment as a part of CGU to which it belongs. And secondly, the assets and liabilities making up that CGU have not changed significantly since the most recent recoverable amount calculation. So you did impairment testing last year as a part of the CGU, and the assets and liabilities of that CGU have not changed significantly from last year to current year. So that is one condition. Second condition is that the last year's calculation, the number was significantly higher than the carrying amount. They are saying that the amount exceeded the assets carrying amount by a substantial margin. So that substantial margin is not defined. You may take it at 25%, you may take it at 30%, you may take it at 50%, up to you. That substantial margin is not defined. And lastly, based on the analysis of events that have occurred and circumstances that have changed since the most recent recoverable amount calculation, the likelihood that a current recoverable amount determination would not be less than the assets carrying amount would be less than the assets carrying amount is remote. So these three conditions: asset was tested last year as a part of the CGU, the assets and liabilities of that CGU have not changed significantly. They will obviously change because every year the numbers are changing, so the assets and liabilities will change, but they should not have changed significantly. And that the last year's calculation yielded a substantial surplus. So there was a surplus last year, and this year it is expected that if the exercise is done again, it will not lead to an impairment. So if these three conditions are satisfied, then we don't have to do testing for impairment of intangible asset with indefinite useful life. So this is, as I mentioned, this exemption is only for intangible asset with indefinite useful life. It is not for goodwill. It is not for intangible assets not being in use. To give an example of intangible assets not being in use is like companies buy brands of other companies and then they stop using those brands. You know, they kill the brand, but the brand is still there. The brand is still with them. So that is an asset, that is an intangible asset that is not being used. So it needs to be tested for impairment every year. So FVLCD, the standard says basically you calculate fair value as you would calculate fair value under Ind AS 113 and then reduce the selling costs. That is what FVLCD is. Or it says that if you have a binding sale agreement, so then use that the selling price as per the binding sale agreement as fair value and then reduce the cost of disposal. If there is no binding or if there is a market, if there is an active market for the asset, you use the selling prices from the active market, which is basically, again, we going back to, if we talk about Ind AS 113, we are going back to level 1 input. So if level 1 input is there, we will use that input. And then reduce. So we take that level 1 input and then we reduce the expenses. Direct cost of selling, such as stamp duty, legal cost, cost of removal, incremental cost of to bring an asset to a saleable condition. So all these are costs of disposal. So we will take the price available and then we will reduce all these costs to bring it to FVLCD. If we don't have a binding sale agreement, if the asset is not traded in an active market, then we have to use other techniques, which could be a DCF, which could be market multiple, so which could be, all those other methods or which could be a replacement cost, depending on the type of asset, depending on, and the information that is available. So FVLCD is basically fair value. So this is, so many times companies for their plant and machine, for factories, when they have factories, they would get a plant and machinery. On those days earlier, we had these registered valuers which were registered with wealth tax authorities and CBDT. So basically chartered engineers and architects, and they would appoint them to carry out fair value of land, building, plant and machinery, and then reduce the cost of expenses, and that used to be FVLCD that they used to use for testing impairment. So now we have these registered valuers for plant and machinery and for land and building. So those people can do that job. Or alternatively, if there's a factory, the factory can also be valued on a DCF basis. So a fair value can be done on a DCF basis also, or a market multiple, depending on what kind of a business it is. So fair value less cost of disposal. So this is purely in accordance with Ind AS 113, except that we are then reducing the costs of disposal. So we calculate fair value as per Ind AS 113 and then we reduce the cost of disposal. That is how we get FVLCD. Second method is value in use. Value in use, as I mentioned earlier, is a plain and simple discounted cash flow method. Here we are not going into cost approach or market approach. All that is not there. It is defined in the standard Ind AS 36 itself. It is a discounted cash flow method, and it is basically equal to the enterprise value. So liabilities are not reduced. So it is roughly equal to the enterprise value. So we are basically comparing the cost of assets, the carrying amount of assets in the books versus the enterprise value, broadly speaking. However, to calculate the discounted cash flow, the standard has given certain parameters that we have to use. So we look at those parameters. First is an estimate of the future cash flows that the entity expects to derive from the assets. Then it also says that we have to consider what are the possible variations in the amount or timing of those future cash flows. So that means we may have to calculate more than one cash flow. We may have to calculate 3 or 4 different scenarios. So basically we do a scenario analysis here. So we calculate 3 or 4 different scenarios, apply weights, and then sort of do a DCF for each scenario and then apply weights and come to a value. So that is one way of doing it. Then it says that we have to consider the discount rate. The discount rate they are saying is starting with the time value of money represented by the current market risk-free rate of interest. It is similar like we do in calculating WACC. We start with the risk-free rate of interest. So here also we are starting with the risk-free rate of interest, and we add the price for bearing the uncertainty inherent in the asset, and other factors such as illiquidity that market participants would reflect in pricing the future cash flow the entity expects to derive. So basically, ultimately, we are coming to a kind of a WACC only over here. So basically, we derive a kind of WACC only over here because we are considering the price of uncertainty that is there in the asset, or illiquidity. Illiquidity basically comes from cost of equity fundamentals. So things like that we take and we calculate a discount rate. So if we are only talking about a single asset like a piece of land or a building, then we may not necessarily have to do a complete WACC. We may simply take incremental cost of borrowing. That is also possible. We can take incremental cost of borrowing, and that can become a discount rate if it is just a single asset, single piece of asset. But if it is a CGU or if it is a business, then that incremental cost of borrowing is not applicable. Then we have to go more towards WACC. So, okay, this is the standard is also talking about using the dividend discount model, which is again a discounted cash flow only, but it is basically meant for having investments. So if you have an investment in a subsidiary, you can calculate the value in use by using the dividend discount model. So whatever dividends that subsidiary is expected to give, you use that as a cash flow to do a dividend discount model. So, but I haven't seen many companies doing that. Most companies do a full-fledged proper DCF. So other thing is another important thing that the standard says that the cash flows have to be only up to the life of the asset. So this is very important. Here they are not talking about perpetuity or term in that sense. So they are saying that every asset has a life. So you have to consider the life of the asset. This standard has basically been written more from the perspective of factories and land and building and things like that. It doesn't really reflect what would happen for service industries or for financial companies, NBFCs, banks. It doesn't really cater to those type of businesses because it is talking about residual life of the asset. So only in case of factories, etc., that you will have, or maybe a building which is rented out, there you have a useful life of the asset. But in cases of service business, in case of banking business, things like that, we don't have really a life of the asset. So basically it says, so your cash flow projection should not go beyond the life of the asset. And at the end of the life of the asset, we have to consider whatever is the realizable value or the scrap value of that asset, whatever we will get on disposal, then we will consider that. So you prepare cash flows for the life of the asset, and then at the end, you add the scrap value. And then the standard also says that ideally the projections should not be for more than 5 years unless justified. And if they are beyond 5 years, then you have to use a steady or a declining growth rate. You cannot use a growth rate which is continuing to increase. It has to be a steady or a declining growth rate. And it should not exceed the long-term average growth rate for the product, market, industry in which the same is used. So this is also what the standard is saying. So if you want to show growth, you can show growth for the first 5 years. So suppose you have a factory, a company is in business of say making soaps. So they have a big factory where they make soaps, as an example. And so suppose that factory still has a balanced life of 12 years. So one option is that you make projections for 5 years, and then you say, okay, after 5 years, if I will sell this factory, what money will I get? And you consider that. So 5 years projections plus the disposal of factory after 5 years. That is one option. Second option is that you make the cash flows for 12 years. You make the cash flows for 12 years. So you can show growth for the first 5 years, but after 5 years, you have to show a steady or a declining growth rate. And at the end of 12 years, we will use we will say, okay, factory is now sold for scrap or whatever realizable value, and we will consider that realizable value at the end of 12 years. So there are two models sort of which we can use over here to do our future cash flow. We cannot assume perpetuity, especially when we are talking about factories, buildings, things like that. We cannot assume perpetuity. So that this is a very big difference between our fair value calculation and this calculation. Cash flow should be estimated for assets in their current condition. Capacity expansion enhancement is not to be considered. So we cannot assume that in future capacity will increase. We have to only assume that we have certain capacity and that capacity will be maintained. That is all we can assume, that that capacity will be maintained. So you can consider maintenance capital expenditure or other maintenance expenditure as a part of cash flows, but you cannot assume that the capacity will increase. So that cannot be assumed. So that is another difference between this and fair value calculations. So estimated future cash flow should include projections from cash inflows from continuing use of the asset, projections from cash outflows that are necessarily incurred to generate cash inflows from continuing use of the asset. So, well, inflows are your revenues, outflows are all your expenses, increase in working capital, etc. And net cash flows on the disposal of the asset on an arm's length transaction basis. So either at the end of 5 years, what will be the value of the asset you sell off, you consider that, or at the end of 12 years, you consider whatever realizable value you will get, and this is that you consider your cash flows. And cash flows to be based on entity-specific factors and not factors that a market participant would use. So this is another big difference from fair value. So entity-specific factors means that if there are two businesses or two CGUs or whatever, and there are synergies between them, we can capture those synergies in our cash flows. A market participant may or may not capture those synergies in their cash flows, because if they are buying only one division, they may not get those synergies from other divisions or that CGU. So market participant may or may not capture those synergies, but because we are doing entity specific valuation here, we can capture the synergies as a part of our cash flows. So this is another big difference from fair value. Estimated future cash flows should not include future cash flows or inflows or outflows that are expected to arise from a future restructuring to which an enterprise is not yet committed. So if you want to do any future restructuring which has not yet been announced, that cannot be considered. Future capital expenditure that will improve or enhance the CGU or asset. So that again, as I said, that we cannot consider any capacity expansion, any increase in capacity, any increase in efficiency. All those things cannot be considered. But maintenance capex has to be considered. So that the same level of capacity can be maintained. So that maintenance capex is important. That can be considered. Cash inflows, outflows from financing activities are not to be considered. So that is all below the line. Income tax payments or receipts are not to be considered. So we are only considering pre-tax cash flows here. Unlike the DCF that we do for fair valuation, where we consider post-tax cash flows, here we will consider only pre-tax cash flows. And as you will see on the other slide, we also consider, when we consider discount rate, we also consider a pre-tax discount rate. So both cash flows and discount rates are pre-tax here. So this is how we will compute cash flows for future. You have revenues less cash expenses, which include cost of goods sold, selling and administration expenses, but will not include any finance cost, which is equal to cash profit, less maintenance capex, less decrease in net working capital, and that is the cash flows. So this is what you will do for the projection period. And at the end of the projection period, you will take disposal proceeds of those assets or CGU, as the case may be, at the end of the projection period. And also that whatever net working capital was there, that you will say you will realize that net working capital. So you will also add that. So disposal of the land, building, plant and machinery, whatever there is, plus net working capital that you will get back when the life ends. So this is what goes into your cash flows. Also, it says that cash flows have to be estimated in the currency they will be generated. So if you have subsidiaries abroad, so the cash flow should be made in the currencies in which those subsidiaries are doing business. So if there's a company in USA, so you will make the projections in US dollars. If there's a company in UK, you will make projections in British pound. If there's a company in South Africa, you will make projections in South African rand, and like that. And cash flows to be discounted using rates applicable to that currency. So whatever your discount, whatever WACC or whatever incremental borrowing rate, etc., that is applicable in that country, basis that currency, you will apply that only. You will not apply Indian discount rate. And then present value arrived at in foreign currency is then converted to functional currency using spot rate on the date of measurement. So you will do that. So then whatever our present value is, only that we will convert to Indian rupees and then compare it with the carrying value in our books of the assets. So this is again which has been given in the standard. So for foreign subsidiaries, foreign branches, foreign joint ventures, associates, this is what we will do. We will make projections in foreign currency. We will use discount rates applicable to those currencies. And then the present value we will convert using the spot rate on the date of measurement, which mostly the balance sheet date. Then, as I mentioned earlier, the standard says that we have to use a pre-tax discount rate. And the discount rate is based on time value of money and risk specific to the asset for which the cash flow estimates have not been adjusted. So starting point, the standard says is your own WACC of the company, incremental borrowing rate, market borrowing rate. So these are the starting points. You can start these and build them up. As I mentioned that normally for CGUs or businesses, we should be using a WACC. And for if it is just one individual building or a land or something like that, we may use the incremental borrowing rate.
Sir, when we use the WACC, how do we, I mean, WACC would be
pre-tax. It has to be a pre-tax WACC.
The WACC which we normally have, which is based upon the cost of equity and cost of debt. Cost of debt is understandable. Cost of equity, when we, let's say we build it up from a CAPM, in which case, how do we compute a pre-tax cost of equity from the, presumably from the post-tax cost of equity which the market provides? Do we just basically into 1 minus tax rate or something like that, or to put the question other way, the cost of equity which is available in the market, is it pre-tax or post-tax?
That's a good question. I have normally been using it as a pre-tax only because whatever gains that a person makes on capital gains on selling investments, etc., they have to pay tax on it, right?
Correct, sir.
So I have been using the, personally, I may be wrong here, but I have been using that cost of equity from the market as basically a pre-tax rate. So effectively, I have only been adjusting, the debt. Cost of debt I have been taking pre-tax. Yeah. So I'll show you an example on that. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So for a business CGU, it should be adjusted WACC. For a single adjusted, it could be adjusted WACC or a pre-tax cost of incremental borrowing. Okay, so I talked about that as I mentioned earlier, there are lots of differences between value in use and fair value. So I have tried to capture some of the differences in this slide. It may not have captured all the differences, but first is that fair value, we have assumptions that market participants would use. In value in use, we use entity specific assumptions. Again, internal synergies may or may not be considered by market participants. Here we are supposed to consider internal synergies. For fair value, depending on if it is a business, particularly, we may use indefinite life. In VIU, we only have to consider remaining useful life of an asset, of the assets. So if it is a business which has a factory or a plant and machinery, we have to consider only the remaining life of that factory, as I gave an example earlier. Perpetuity value will be considered. Here in VIU, we consider only the disposal proceeds. We don't consider perpetuity value. So at the end of the projection period, if we dispose of the assets, what will we get? Only that is considered. Then in fair value, we can consider capacity expansion, enhancement, capex. For that we can consider. But for value in use, we can only consider maintenance capex. We cannot consider any capex for enhancement of capacity. Then for fair value, we use post-tax cash flows. For value in use, we use pre-tax cash flows. For fair value, we use post-tax discount rate. For value in use, we use pre-tax discount rate. So these are the various differences that are there between fair value and value in use. And therefore, even if when you're doing fair value as per DCF method and value in use, we will get two very different numbers. Yeah. I hope this is clear to everyone.
Hello.
Yeah.
Just one question. So if we are valuing a business, for example, if we are valuing a subsidiary, we are testing implement a subsidiary, even in that case, we are not supposed to find the terminal value?
Again, depends on what kind of a business it is actually. Because if, for example, if there's a factory and things like that, where there's actual physical assets, the standard says we have to only value them till the end of their life. And then consider scrap value or whatever disposal proceeds will get at the end of their life.
If it's a service business?
So that is the issue. Service business is an issue because the standard does not actually, I think when the standard was written, it was written services and banking, etc. were not very big those days. When the standard is actually very old. IS 36 is quite an old standard. So it actually does not focus itself on services or financial services like that. So what I have been doing, like I did in January, February, I did an impairment testing of a NBFC. So basically an investor was coming in, but the investor wanted to have an opinion whether at the balance sheet date there will be any possible impairment. So they wanted to know that before they made the investment. So I did. So what I did in that case is that I saw what infrastructure they had. So they had number of branches through which they were giving loans. So my basic assumption was that while the business will continue in perpetuity, but the number of branches will not grow. So that is where I sort of stopped. So in a normal fair valuation, I could have considered increase in number of branches, etc. But here I assumed that the number of branches will remain as they are. And because they will remain as they are, therefore there was a limit to the growth in business. So sort of the business got capped at a particular level after a point in time. So there was some little bit of inflation impact going forward, but otherwise the business was capped at a particular lending level because it was loans, NBFC giving loans. So the business got capped. So that is how I did that impairment testing. And then, of course, I did a lot of sensitivity analysis. I think I made 15 different scenarios in that case to see what happens in those scenarios. And then I presented that whole scenario analysis as a part of my impairment testing report to the client.
So other alternative, can we, rather than using a Gordon growth model for terminal value, can we use an exit multiple and say that that's the disposal? If you want to exit the business, that's the value at the end of the projected period, what you're going to get.
That is possible. Yes, that is possible. Yeah. So basically, because the standard says that you have to basically consider disposal proceeds. So standard nowhere talks about terminal value actually. Standard is talking about disposal proceeds only. So you can consider an exit multiple or whatever. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so let's go ahead. Okay. So then we come to, so once we have done the recoverable amount, then we come to impairment loss. As I mentioned, impairment loss is basically just carrying amount minus recoverable amount. So carrying amount minus recoverable amount will be your impairment loss. So if there is no revaluation of assets, the impairment loss has to be straight away booked into profit and loss. It does not go into reserves. It does not go anywhere else. It goes straight into profit and loss. If the assets were revalued, then to the extent of revaluation reserve, the impairment loss will get adjusted against the revaluation reserve. If the assets were revalued, if the assets are not revalued, then the whole thing goes straight away, goes to P&L. And then we also have to make a deferred tax adjustment in the profit in the books to the extent of impairment. For the impairment, we also have to calculate a corresponding deferred tax. The standard also says that in case the impairment loss is higher than the carrying amount of an asset, liability to be recognized only if required by another Ind AS. So I really don't know where these circumstances will arise, because I've never seen such a case. So basically, if we say Ind AS 37, now Ind AS 37 says that you cannot create a liability for future losses. So to my mind, in most cases, we will not be able to create a liability So effectively, the asset will be either asset will most probably become zero, or it will become lower of its FVLCD or VIU, whatever the case may be. And then in future years, so once we have done the impairment, then in future years, the depreciation is calculated on the revised amount, on the impaired amount. That becomes a new value for calculating depreciation going forward. Okay, so let's go ahead quickly. Okay, identifying CGU. As I mentioned earlier, that basic standard says that we have to see a group of assets where we can identify a separate set of cash flows. The smallest possible set of assets where we can identify a separate set of cash flows. So that is the CGU. So it depends upon business to business. For every business, it will be different. And also it says that we can also have a CGU even if the output is used internally. For example, the output of one business is one unit is being used in another unit. Even then we can treat it as a separate CGU if that output is marketable. So we can market it to, there's a market available for that output, and we have the market prices available. So we can do cash flows based on market prices. We don't have to use transfer pricing. So that is what, so we are not supposed to use transfer pricing. We are supposed to use arm's length transaction prices to calculate the cash flows. So first there should be a market for that product. So you know, there are many companies like they say, if you take metal companies, they have the mines also. Then they have a thing which sort of melts the ore and converts it into billets or something else. And then they have a third facility which will make further products out of those, whether it is steel or whether it is aluminum or whatever. So there could be intermediate products being produced. So whether those intermediate products can be sold as they are. So if they can be sold as they are, then we will consider the market prices for those products. But if there is no market for that product, so that means the only consumer is the next division of the company or the next CGU of the company, then we combine the two CGUs together. Because then we say that this particular CGU, which is making intermediate products or providing intermediate services or whatever, does not have its own cash flows. Then we combine it with the other CGU which has the cash flows. So that is the difference. So if that CGU, if for example, if we talk about service, if those services can be rendered to third parties also, and there is a market and we can identify what kind of prices will be available in the third market, in the market outside, then you can do that CGU. Then that CGU can be treated separately. You do a cash flow based on market determined prices, arm's length prices. So, okay, look at this example. If you can just read through this. Yeah. So, okay. Again, the same concept, whether it is an asset or whether it is a CGU, we have to consider higher of FVLCD and VIU. So basically, we have to consider all assets relating to that CGU, and sometimes there could be some allocated assets also, and liabilities are not to be considered unless where those liabilities are essentially important. For example, if we talk about working capital, so working capital liabilities we will consider when we are computing the value of CGU. So you have plant and machinery, you have intangible assets, you have trade receivables, you may have some other receivables, and you have sundry creditors, some other liabilities. So trade related working capital we will consider, but we will not consider borrowings or other similar liabilities, or lease liabilities. We will not consider lease liabilities. We will not consider borrowings. So those we will not consider. So it is like an enterprise level number that we are coming at. As I mentioned earlier of a VIU, that we are comparing it to, basically we are coming to an enterprise level value. So that is what it is. So here also the carrying amount is also at enterprise level also. So just look at this example. So CGU is 76 million here, property, plant and equipment, inventories and receivables. That will make up the CGU. Cash and bank is not considered because that is anyway adjusted against the borrowings. So you only have a net debt. And cash anyway is freely transferable, so there is no impairment testing for cash. So cash is not to be considered. So only, so I could have also put in trade payables here, but I didn't, just to keep it simple. But we could have also considered trade payables here. Okay, then basically the standard says that goodwill has to be allocated to all the CGUs which will benefit from that goodwill. So while one particular business might have been bought and goodwill relates to that business only, well, related to that business, but if other businesses are also, because of synergies, etc., other businesses are also benefiting, then goodwill has to be allocated to all those businesses or to all those CGUs. So that is a key issue, you know. So this is something that the management has to do. They have to allocate proportionately to different CGUs, and that is another, from an auditor perspective, that can become very tricky because the auditor has to make sure. For a valuer, it is not a problem because valuer will simply take the number that the management is giving and then do testing. But for an auditor, that whether it is an appropriate allocation, that is not so easy. That the auditor has to check.
The goodwill which has to be appropriated should be an impairment tested goodwill. Am I right?
No. So when a company buys a business and there is goodwill arising in that transaction, then at that point in time itself, that goodwill has to be allocated. If there are other CGUs, existing CGUs of the company that will benefit from that transaction, if there are synergies flowing to other businesses, etc., then it has to be allocated at that point in time itself.
In the subsequent year.
So then each CGU's assets will also have a part of goodwill. So suppose company A had 3 divisions and it bought a new division, so division 4. So then the goodwill of that, and the company says that that all the divisions will benefit from this addition. So the goodwill will get allocated to all the 4 divisions A, B, C, D, and then each division will have a goodwill, and every year each of those divisions will have to be tested for impairment because they have goodwill. Because they have goodwill.
And in the subsequent year, when we have to again allocate the goodwill in order to compute
goodwill is allocated only once, and it stays with each CGU then. Goodwill is allocated only once, and it stays with each CGU. It becomes a part of that CGU going forward.
Okay, thank you, sir.
So when in future, say a division is sold and it has an allocated goodwill, that goodwill will be considered to compute gain loss on sale of that division. So goodwill, when allocated, remains allocated. You are not doing this exercise every year. And then each year, each CGU which has goodwill will get tested for impairment. And for some CGUs, there may be impairment, some CGUs, there may not be impairment. So where there is no goodwill to a CGU, then that CGU has to be tested only when there is an indicator of impairment. That's what we discussed earlier, external and internal indicators. But for which there is CGU, where there is CGU, then those have to be tested for impairment annually. But the date can be any date in the year. As I mentioned earlier, it need not be year end. Company has to fix a date, but they have to do the testing at that date every year. So I gave the example of 31st December. So some companies actually do it on 31st December. So every year they will do it on 31st December. It's not necessary to do it on 31st March. And then same concept, basically, if your recoverable value is lower than carrying value, then you will have an impairment. However, the standard says that first of all, goodwill has to be written off. Goodwill has to be impaired. That is the first item to go. First item to go is goodwill. Then if further impairment is remaining, that impairment has to be prorated on non-current assets, basically. Because current assets will be realized at their current value. So there is really no impairment there. And anyway, there are other standards, for example, Ind AS 109, which says that you have to do expected credit loss model and all that. So that impairment is already taken care of in Ind AS 109. Or if you talk about inventories, Ind AS 2, it already says that you have to take at cost or lower of cost or net realizable value. So those are, so current assets are already taken care of. So the impairment is only accounted for on non-current assets. So they are intangible assets, tangible assets, goodwill. So three items: goodwill, tangible assets, and tangible assets. So first you write off goodwill, and then if it is remaining, then you prorata write it off over other non-current assets. However, the standard has given a condition that for any asset, you cannot reduce it below the highest of fair value less cost to sell, its value in use if determinable, and zero. So this is for each asset. So you have each machinery or whatever, because ultimately when you are allocating the assets to tangible and intangible assets, you have to further go and allocate it further down to respective assets. It's not just the whole block. So you have to then make sure that you are not reducing it to the lower of higher of FV LCD, because that means that it can anyway be sold in the market for FV LCD. So it cannot have a value lower than that, or value in use if determinable. This will be difficult. Value in use for a single asset is very difficult, unless it's a building which is given on rent or something like that. Otherwise, if you have a factory, you cannot have a value in use for each machine. So this is that is why it says if determinable. So it's very difficult, and zero. So basically, FV LCD is possible under a replacement cost method or a reproduction method or whatever. For each plant, each machinery, it is possible to get a value. So let us look at an example of impairment. How do we allocate the impairment? In this case, the total value is 1,000 crores and the recoverable amount is 750 crores. So we have to say that means 250 crores is the impairment. So we have to allocate 250 crores. So if you look at this, so first, as I mentioned, first goodwill has to be written off. So out of 250 crores, first of all, and here we have 100 crores of goodwill here in this example. So first we will write off 100 crores of goodwill, and then we have 150 crores left. 150 crores will be prorated over tangible and intangible assets. So 100 crores is adjusted against tangible assets, and 50 crores.
Could be some connectivity issues. We'll just wait for a while. One announcement anyways I can make now. Tomorrow we are planning to schedule Mr. Joy Kumar Jain business combination, the balance portion between 10 to 12. The invite will be sent on WhatsApp.
Okay. So I don't know where I stopped. Because I was speaking, and then I suddenly realized that there is. It seems that nobody is hearing me. So I talked about the allocation. So as I mentioned that because first goodwill have to be written off. So 250 crores is the total impairment. So first we will write off 100 crores for goodwill, and balance 150 crores will get pro rata allocated between tangible and intangible assets. So 100 crores goes into tangible assets, and 50 crores goes off in intangible assets. So that is how 250 crores is allocated. So let's look at another example where we have certain FE, LCD, etc. So same example, 1,000 crores of carrying amount, 750 crores of impairment of recoverable amount, 250 crores is the impairment. But here we have FE, LCD available, 550 crores for tangible assets and 200 crores for intangible assets. So in this case, so if you see my columns, the first column or the second column is pro rata, which is what we had seen in the previous example. In any case, when it comes to goodwill has to be written off first. There is no concept of FE, LCD or VIU, etc. as far as goodwill is concerned. Goodwill has to be written off. So we write off goodwill, and then balance 150 crores. We see what is the FE, LCD, because we have to maintain that FE, LCD minimum. So if you see tangible assets, 550 crores is the FE, LCD, so we can only write off 50 crores here. So in the previous example, we had written off 100 crores from tangible assets, but in here we are only able to write off 50 crores, and we are able to write off the balance 100 crores from intangible assets. So 250 crores total intangible, total impairment minus 100 crores of goodwill minus 50 crores of tangible assets, we are left with 100 crores. And the FE, LCD is 200 crores. So here the whole 100 crores is getting consumed in intangible assets. So we are coming to FE, LCD of 200 crores. So that is how. So this is how the impairment can vary from asset class to asset class because of FE, LCD or VIU, if that is possible. So this is again basically whatever we have spoken so far, that is in the form of a flowchart. Once I share my presentation with you, then you can read it carefully. It is there as a part of the standard also, I think. Yeah. Also, again, if there are indicators, then there could be possibility that impairment may be reversed, except for goodwill. Goodwill impairment is not allowed to be reversed. Once goodwill is impaired, it will always remain impaired. Everything, impairment of other assets, other intangible assets, tangible assets, that can be reversed, but goodwill cannot be reversed. So apart from goodwill, so if the recoverable amount goes higher than the carrying amount, and there was some impairment in previous years, that impairment can be reversed. So again, here we look at whether to test whether there should be a testing again for reversal. There are some indicators, external and internal, and basically these are reverse of what we discussed in earlier. So earlier impairment indicators, these are effectively the reverse of those. Market prices increased, market interest rates have gone down, significant favorable impact. So these are basically reverse of what we had discussed earlier. So as I mentioned, goodwill, impairment of goodwill is never reversed, but for all other assets, it can be reversed. So let us look at one example here. So this is the example that we had seen earlier, where we had 660. So now it is basically 1 year has elapsed. 1 year has elapsed from the impairment that we did in the previous example. So after 1 year, again the recoverable amount remains at 750 crores, but our carrying amount, because of depreciation and as amortization, has gone down to 660 crores. So in this case, we have a 90 crore rupees available with us for write back. goodwill has become zero. So goodwill will always remain zero. So 90 crores can be written back only in tangible and intangible assets. So again we will do a pro rata thing depending on what is our FELCD, and the only issue that arises here is that the standard says that we have to first compute what will be the carrying amount had no impairment taken place. So we had in our previous example, we had the carrying amount of tangible assets at 600 crores, and then we wrote off 50 crores of impairment. We were left with 550 crores, and then 1 year later that 550 crores became 500 crores because of depreciation. Now if the company had taken that 600, if there was no impairment, company would have continued with 600 crores and then applied depreciation on that 600 crores, so that would have become 540 crores. If you see here again, first the second column that I have, which is 540 crores. Similarly, intangible assets were earlier 300 crores, which are impaired. So on 300 crores without impairment, if we had depreciated, so that would have become 240 crores. So my total value would have been 880 crores. But I only have a gap of 90 crores here. So I can only reverse 90 crores here. So I will first calculate what is the pro rata amount. Pro rata, here it is 68 crores and here it is 22 crores. But I can only do 540 here. I cannot exceed 540 because that would have anyway been the amount if no impairment had taken place. So I will limit so 540 minus the carrying cost 500. So only 40 crores can be the reversal of impairment here. There is a higher possibility in intangible assets because here the 240 crores, and while we had 160 crores. So we have a play of 80 crores here. So balance 50 crores can be, because we have a space of 80 crores available. So the balance 50 crores can be adjusted in intangible assets. So our tangible assets will become 540 crores. Our intangible assets will become 210 crores. So 540 plus 210 becomes 750 crores. So that is how the reversal will take place. With this, I will stop. The only thing I will say is that we have already covered the most important parts. The only thing that is left is corporate assets and disclosures, which sort of is not so important. And for disclosures, I've also shared a PwC illustrative financial statements with you. So you can sort of read through it and you will get a very good idea of what the disclosure should be. So with this, I end. Thank you all so very much. I know I've taken much more time than I should have, but it's just these polls, I'm not so used to them. So taking more time. Yeah.
I request Mr. Chandrasekhar to convey vote of thanks.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. It's actually a great honor for me to speak here to express our vote of thanks to Sri Joy sir, a very senior and experienced professional. His depth of knowledge, the various cases that he has come across during his long years of practice and international experience, all these come to show when he responds to our questions with confidence and lucidity. Actually, India's IFRS, IAS, accounting standards, they are all deep technical subjects, and to be on top of each one of them, it requires a professional grind. Our Sri Joy sir proves that he's on top of them. And the best part is he has taken the presentation using simple languages, examples, and also you given us polls and other some sort of a question answer kind of a session that has helped us to be very attentive. The interaction, and he allows us to ask questions and he is able to answer all of them also with confidence. That is the brilliant part. And actually his flair and his interest to transfer the knowledge, even if that means he may have to spend another 10 to 15 minutes extra, it speaks very high of him as a professional. I am very fortunate to have attended this presentation. Tomorrow's session, Shilpa has already made the announcement. I thank everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been my honor to be part of this group, and I hope to see everyone tomorrow morning. Thank you. Bye-bye.